Okay, how does my hair look? Can I get a hair check on one, please? Hair check on one? Huh? We're live? Oh, hey. Oh, hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Rich, but I think you know that by the attendee roster. I think I know about 50% of you. We're running a series of webinars like these over the months. Anyway, today's topic is holistic security testing for the new threat landscape. So we were sitting around talking about, we're getting a lot of input from our clients, given COVID and the new pandemic, some new areas to explore, some new ideas. How do we cover the expanded threat surface with COVID, everybody working from home, how the attack surface has expanded exponentially. So this webinar essentially is a response to that, is an idea of how we can enhance our security penetration testing that we're currently doing to get more from it to address the threats working from home, etc. Anyway, it's in some respects it's an idea that's been around for a couple of years, but we seem to have forgotten it. So let's move on. Okay, webinar, not the best of venues for this, but I'd remind you, if you have a question, just drop it into the chat box, drop your questions in, and we'll do our best to answer them as we go through. If we don't have time, because I talk a lot and I've had quite a few coffees today, we'll absolutely get back and email you an answer. Okay, we've got a pretty big remit today. We thought we split it up. My name's Rich, you know that. I'm a director here at Risk Crew. I've been a director since we started up. We've been in business 15 to 20 years. We're a product agnostic consultancy. Anyway, but we're also, I asked Jeff to join us because Jeff works with our clients in scoping pen testing. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Rich. Yeah, so my name's Jeff. I help with all my clients. Full circle, really. I help with scoping, post-testing. I help with remediations, workshops, recommendations, things like that. I know how to open a computer, work a scanner, but by no means am I a penetration tester. But maybe one day. We all have aspirations and dreams, don't we?
Indeed. Odd fact, Jeff just recently won our John Hamm lookalike contest here at work at Risk Crew. So kudos to you, Jeff. Jeff's joined us because Jeff's the guy who actually works with the clients to flush out the details in scoping for pen testing. So he's got a lot of experience about what works and what doesn't and where the concerns are. So in between Jeff and I'm kind of like the song and dance man. For me, it's all about risk, those of you who know me. So I'm sort of Barry Manilow's to Jeff's Bob Dylan, as it were. So anyway, we'll trade this off. I thought I'd open up, get us on our way. We've got quite a bit to talk about. This is not a sales pitch, but it is worthwhile saying, given that we're a product agnostic consultancy, everything that we're going to talk about is all about risk management. So yes, today we're going to talk about a different way to do security penetration testing, but in fact, our view on pen testing is it's just one tool in your portfolio of risk management tools. And so everything we talk about today, it's not a be-all, end-all. It's one of the many things that you should be doing to identify, minimize, and manage your risks. Okay, anyway, enough said. So we're going to start the day talking about holistic security testing. But before we do, I thought it'd be worthwhile to talk about what security pen testing in general. What is your expectation when you get a pen test? I want to also go over attack vectors, general vulnerabilities, and then apply these to the new landscape. Then I want to say, okay, if this is what we're doing and it's not good enough, what about holistic testing? What about a different approach to doing technical security testing and by just increasing the scope? I'll hand it over to Jeff. Jeff's going to talk about what we should be testing and why. What KPIs we should be collecting, and of course, we want to end it up with whatever we do, how do we mature it and get it better year after year after year, which we're not applying to pen testing in general, much less a new approach to pen testing. One more time, any questions, just drop them in. I'll do my best to stop my jabbering and address your question. All right, so let's start with the very first place to start. What's a pen test? For me, I purposely went to SANS and benchmarked this against Wikipedia because I know my clients struggle with this definition. What is a security penetration test? When they call in and ask us, will you do a pen test? Jeff's first question is why? Why do you need to do a pen test? What's the objective? But technically, a security penetration test is understood to be an authorized simulated cyber attack, ethical hacking, on a computer system performed to evaluate the security of the system. Universally agreed. Now, there's good tests, there's bad tests. We all know it's all in the scoping. But the biggest problem is it's not a vulnerability assessment. Vulnerability assessment is typically done in security penetration tests to identify the vulnerabilities, but it's the manual exploitation of those vulnerabilities identified that actually make it a test against the target. Okay, so security penetration test then is identification of vulnerabilities associated with target, manual exploitation of those vulnerabilities to get access to a target or unauthorized access or get access to a file folder, but it always should have a crystal clear objective. Okay, I wanted to start with that definition because we apply that definition day in, day out every time we do pen testing, but ultimately most of our clients end up getting what is a glorified vulnerability assessment. Here's my problem with pen testing. My grandfather, God rest his soul, used to say, to predict a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you know what? I think of that every time I think about a pen test. You know, when I talk to our clients about pen testing, I say, what's the objective? Because to your systems, a pen tester takes a hammer, takes a Nessus, takes a Metasploit, takes a Wireshark tool, all right? Takes a tool and looks at your system with the tool that he has, right? So for me, this is a very apt analogy. To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a pen tester, everything looks like an Nmap problem. Okay, and what they find with Nmap or don't find with Nmap ultimately ends up to be the deliverable, right? So they only find what the tool allows them to see. So I like this. I like this idea because when I look at pen testing today, it's really led by how good is the pen tester and how many tools are they using? What is the actual technical view they're getting of the system of your vulnerabilities? And it all depends on what? The tool, right? The hammer. Anyway, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I just can't get that out of my head. When I think about pen testing, I think that's exactly why, because that hammer determines what you see. All right, so anatomy of attack. Whenever we talk about pen testing, this is the underlying idea that we're doing some sort of ethical hacking. We're doing some sort of simulated cyber attack that has these 5 elements involved. You got a threat agent, okay, an insider, a hacktivist, all the way down to a nation state. But when you're pen testing, you're simulating an attack agent, a threat agent, a threat actor. You're taking a threat, you're looking at the system to see, is it vulnerable to this denial of service, this spyware, this road apple, or social engineering attacks. You're finding a vector to get that attack in through email or through a telephone or through a Wi-Fi connection or through a website. You're going to exploit this vulnerability against a target, an asset, right? So you've got the who, the how, the where, the why, the what. And this, to me, if this is not simulated in your penetration testing, you're not getting a penetration test. If this relationship, these dots aren't being connected in the ethical hack, that you've got a threat agent who's activating a threat through a threat vector, exploiting a vulnerability against the target asset. All right, now, the complexity of this, any one of these, you could, the variables in this differ exponentially, especially when we're now working from home. You've got to understand that now with the attack surface to include work from home environments, and you've got VPNs, you've got endpoint devices, and all of these now vulnerabilities in terms with where we used to be behind firewalls and intrusion detection and all the nuts and bolts protecting us in our business environment. What may or may not be extended into a work and home environment expands the attack surface. I put this up there because I don't think back to back that we match this definition with this sort of scenario. This is the assumption that I have. My clients ask us for a pen test, and I explain that this is what we should be doing for you. And so scoping what attacks, what threats, what vulnerabilities, what assets should be is everything, as we all know. Okay, I wanted to lay that out because then I want to say if this is what the anatomy of attack looks like, then when we consider attack surfaces and vulnerabilities, and we've got an attacker, whoever they might be, he's looking for the entire surface. All right? This is not necessarily all technology. So he's looking for attack surfaces to use as an attack vector. And certainly, we all know this. We say this every time we get together for conferences, and it's not just about technology. It's about people, process, and technology. So our point here today is, why aren't we increasing the scope of a pen test to include looking at the attack surfaces and vulnerabilities associated with people, associated with process, as well as technology? So an attacker is going to look at people and say, okay, can I get in through social engineering, phishing, a road apple, some sort of spyware? Can I bypass of access control they have on site to get on site? Or can I exploit some poor policies, no incident reporting? They don't do that. They're terrible on patching. They've got a data leakage problem. The attacker will exploit that vulnerability and take the quickest route into the target. That's just human nature. Everybody's as lazy as I am, I'm assuming, and I'm not going to, try a brute force attack knocking down a firewall when I can just pick up the phone and socially engineer some credentials. You find the path of least resistance. Anyway, by doing penetration testing, here's another view of the attack vector. We've got a threat agent he's literally got three vectors. He can go in through people, going through technology, or going through process. So this red line traces what would technically be a technical attack, okay, a denial of service attack, where he's going into the technology, he's exploiting a weakness in the control to have an impact on a function, to drop a firewall, to drop a website, to get access and have access or impact on an asset. That's what we know as almost the kill chain, but that's how that looks to us from a threat actor point of view. He's looking for people. How do I get in? People, process, or technology. If you take technology routes, he's only going to be exploiting weaknesses in technology controls to have the impacts on the functionality, to bring us down, or to exfiltrate information. Make sense? Clear? I don't know, but it seems to make sense to me, because when we pen test, this is what we're doing. When we do a security penetration test, this is technically what we should be looking at: the weakness in controls that, if exploited, could have an impact on function or assets, right? But back this up, and what I hope to show you is that this is 1/3 of the problem. Penetration testing will only address, good penetration testing will only address the weakness in controls. And that's good, that's fine. But what we're advocating here today is going beyond that. Let's talk a little about a different approach, all right? This idea of holistic testing, it's been around. First and foremost, don't confuse it with red team testing. It's not a red team test, okay? But just by expanding the scope of a security penetration test, maybe you can get more. And holistic testing is that. Holistic testing then is a series of authorized attacks on people, process, and technology, all right, performed to evaluate all of your controls, not just your technical controls, but all of your controls implemented in your information security management system. And this shouldn't be confused with a pen test, nor should it be confused with a vulnerability assessment. It's not a red team test, all right? It's an incremental test to start implementing what your key people, your key processes are, and why aren't you testing these? And that's what we want to talk about today. This testing approach, by expanding the scope of your existing penetration testing program, how you can get a better view, a more holistic view of your vulnerabilities. All right, so let me just make this one point, and I'll hand it over to Jeff. So where we were before, I said, okay, this is what a typical penetration test addresses, just weaknesses in control. This is what holistic testing will give you, that kind of view. Doesn't that make all the difference in the world? You start holistic testing and you understand the weaknesses in all of your controls, the weaknesses in your people, the weaknesses in your process, as well as the weaknesses in your technology. It's a bigger picture. It's much more enhanced return on your investment. So rather than look at just the technology attacks, you suddenly start addressing the vulnerabilities associated with people, the vulnerabilities associated with process. Make sense? It's much in a big picture. You're getting a three-fer rather than you're testing all three attack vectors associated with the protection and all the money you put in to protect your information assets. This is much more of a realistic and authentic, a real world attacker view of your vulnerabilities, and not just your technical vulnerabilities, but by enhancing the scope and looking at people and process like any attacker would. And this is what we're finding out. We're remediating all our vulnerabilities and we're still getting hacked. Well, this is because we're pen testing and is only addressing one attack vector. Now, when you identify your weakest areas, is it your people, is it your process, or is it your technology? It allows you to prioritize your resources and your money. And that's all the difference in the world in this budget tight economy. Okay, so let me end you with, if my grandfather were alive today and I said, Gramps, you think about holistic testing, I think he'd say, well, that's a man with 3 hammers. It's a hammer for people, a hammer for process, and a hammer for technology. And so this is what we want to talk about today. Let me turn it over to Jeff, and we're going to talk about what you need to scope and KPIs. Jeff?
Great stuff. Thanks a lot there, Rich. I've often thought of that approach myself, maybe taking a hammer to technology on many a time when it's broken. So I think that's probably the only way out there. If it's broke, switch it off. If not, hit it with a hammer, and hopefully that will resolve itself. But yeah, thanks a lot for that. So if we look to the what's and why and start off with people. Look, first of all, I think you need to get buy-in from the board. You get buy-in from the board, and I think the rest will follow suit, and hopefully that will snowball down into place. Once you have the buy-in from the board, just confirm they're compliant to the policies and controls that you put in place. And ensure your security processes are getting through to the staff and you can actually see a change in their behaviour. I think if you stick to those 3 things, the basics, then you can really start to build it out over time. Moving on to processes, I think you need to test processes like instant response, patching, disaster recovery. What you want to find out is fundamentally, do they work? Can you identify a breach? What is being reported? Did they follow your procedure guidelines? I think that's very important. Guidelines are there for a reason. And look, I know it's a bit of a pain in the ass when you've been writing and planning and doing these procedures for a number of times, because sometimes they're just ineffective. And I think we've seen that in COVID. That's clearly demonstrated that sometimes you can do a lot of work on paper, but they're not going to cover all contingencies. So just make yourself aware that always follow the pattern of likelihood and things like that. And you should be okay, really. Okay, and finally, moving across into technology, looking at the 3 processes, people, processes, and technology. Look, technically testing, you should have a specific objective, like can an attacker get unauthorized access into your system? Can they have access into your critical assets? And can these assets be removed undetected? I think that's what you want to find out. At the same time, you should always be testing your CIA controls wherever possible as well, which is good. So look, if we're moving across into scoping, I think scoping is probably one of the things that I do actually like doing. I do it on a regular basis. I think you have to understand what's in scope. And for me as well, don't treat every assessment like the last. I think every assessment has to be different. You have to understand the business risk to the organisation. Different sectors have different risks, so you have to take a modern approach to it. At the same time, you've got to ask yourself the question: does this company have any compliance standards? Do they have any compliance standards that you have to meet and adhere to? But I think the biggest thing is, look, you have to understand where your crown jewels are and how you're going to protect them. The difference between a good assessment and a bad one is the devil in the detail. If we are talking about detail, I was reading Forbes last week, and they estimate that 90% of the data we have today was created in the last 2 years. We're in a position where we're even dealing with information overload, or we're facing the fact that we can't protect everything. And again, this just throws up some more tricky questions to us. Where are you going to keep that? Where are you going to keep that data? Is it critical, and what staff have access to them? And again, just going back to the policies, what policies and procedures do you actually have in place for that protection?
Yeah, Jeff, I would just add that that was the point, in terms of us identifying the attack vectors. what are your most obvious attack vectors, and start there for holistic testing. The key staff, not all staff, but the key staff that have the access that's in line with the attack vector most obvious for an attack. The key policies that should be in place to identify an intrusion and respond to that intrusion. The key technology in scope for that. That's where you start. The attack vectors. What you're looking to do is just outline the attack vectors through staff, processes, and technology.
Yeah, good point.
That's my 2 cents. Excuse me, Jeff.
That's good. And of course, if we're looking to test people, I think the obvious place to start is, let's use phishing as an example. I think when phishing, the first few attacks expect a large number of employees to be susceptible. I don't think it's uncommon for about 60 to 70% of employees to be targeted to actually click on a malicious link. Generally, there's about 5 to 10% drop off in employees that supply domain credentials, and a further 2 to 4% drop off in those that attempt to download a malicious executable. And again, you're not going to know the extent of your problem until you've actually measured it. On the upside, for those that come forward and say, look, I think we found a suspicious link here, or this might have all the characteristics of a very good phish. You want to praise those who are actually reporting that and coming forward and letting the company know. I think that's very key. At the same time, look, education is key. You want to see a reduction in those figures over time and then build it out gradually. Okay, so if we are moving forward, we're testing the processes. We write plans to minimize risk, change management, incident reporting, incident response, business continuity, and disaster recovery. Look, fundamentally, you want to know, do they work? How do you know they work? When was the last time that you tested one and collected data on that? Plans need to be subjected to continual improvement to be effective. And at the same time as well, you want to include critical processes in your security testing, identify flaws, and pretty much similar to pen testing, just start to plug some of those gaps really. Moving along into technology. Technology is one of my favorite sectors, especially when we are talking about a hammer. I think technology becomes a little bit clearer from our point of view. We can select an approach. We're looking at white, we're looking at grey, we're looking at black hat. We can use a certain framework, whether it be NIST or OWASP, and then it's kind of refining the objectives. Can you get unauthorized access into a system? Yes, no, it's quite simple. And then you want to expand and include maybe targeted attacks from there. Couple that spring to mind, look, can Active Directory permissions be bypassed? Network segmentation, is it possible to jump the fences? And call logs and records can be accessed and tampered with. I think that those are three fairly key ones to do with technology, really.
Can I just emphasize? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a client, Jeff. You know, and I said, okay, your last pen test, what were you testing for? And they said, well, we identified all these vulnerabilities. I said, no, what were you testing for? Did you test for unauthorized access, like PCI? What did you get the test for? I got it for PCI. Okay, so the question is, did you get unauthorized access? Did the pen testers get unauthorized access to cardholder data? Oh, we didn't test that. Why are we doing pen testing if we don't have that sharpened point on all our testing? The major question is, did you get in? And that's what you should be asking your testers. Did you get in? Yes or no? It's a binary response that we're looking for. Did you get in? Given the scope, given the time frame, given the technology, did you get in? Well, and too often we hear, well, I could have, I would have, I should have. But nobody answers the question. Did you get unauthorized access, yes or no? And that's the kind of objective I would press your pen tester. That's the kind of response or answer I would keep pressing your pen tester until he gives you. Okay, that's number two. I'll shut up.
No, it's good. It's good. But yeah, look, I think that's very relevant. I also think, look, KPIs, you want to be collecting those in testing. I think you really need to understand KPIs in order to understand your problems and see the bigger picture. If you're not tracking KPIs, you won't be able to clearly understand how effective your efforts have been. At the end of the day, look, you want to know if you made an improvement, or on the opposite side of that coin, look, have they declined over time? If so, you need to look at your problems there. And I think KPIs are a great way for communicating with business stakeholders. Without good metrics, you won't be able to build a case for your vision or your budget, really. I think it's imperative. I think you need to kind of benchmark and tell a story, especially when you're looking at a report to a non-technical colleague. KPIs, they should be clear, relevant, and give you a full picture of your security posture. I think that's fundamental today, because everyone works on a shoestring, especially with COVID. The price is coming down from people's purses, so you've got to make sure that it's very relevant. And KPIs would suggest that. If you're looking at KPIs in people as well, I think you start with the basics, really. Look, are employees reporting issues? And if they are, again, it's a very good sign, because that means that they're buying into your training. Use the metrics to identify some of the weak links to the company. Some people might need more training. It's not about trying to embarrass someone. What you're trying to do is bring up their confidence and educate them at the same time. And just try to define KPIs and metrics for all employees, including senior management. I can't tell you how many CISOs that were caught out in the past. And I guess you can kind of liken that to maybe Dominic Cummings not following his own rules. But you've got to have the guys at the top buying in, which I said right at the start. Okay, and if we're on the processes, if it was me, I would want to know who's got the keys to my kingdom. What percentage of employees have privileged access? Who are they? Are they all monitored? And do they really need that access? Quite relevant. I'm not too sure if anyone saw the Twitter hack yesterday, social engineering, which targeted employees with access to admin tools, to all the major accounts. And we saw the Bitcoin double scam, where they got hold of the Twitter account and said, look, if you send 1,000 to this Bitcoin account, I'll double it up and send you 2. Honestly, I think a lot of people fell for that. I would like to say that people are fairly savvy in the market now, but I can imagine the amount of people that actually got conned out of that. And I think we're probably looking somewhere into the millions because of that yesterday. That said, a little bit of friendly advice. This is more for the engineers, the technical guys, really. I think they really need to implement a tiered Active Directory administration model. Minimum, at least three levels of admin to isolate credentials and prevent them from being compromised. You need to segregate these: domain admin, server admin, workstation admin. No single account can have access to all the systems, and for me, this is absolutely massive. And just going back to look, at the same time, you want to know who has access to what. Identify, isolate, and log access to all your critical data. Know where your critical data is located, and make sure you log and monitor it at kind of all times. And again, it's very important to keep metrics for both and follow suspicious trends at the same time. And lastly, personal favourite of mine is look, patch. I think every morning as you wake up with your patch hat on, not just on a Tuesday. Operating systems, third-party applications, it's a great way to start hardening against a targeted attack. And just, as well as I do, look, patch your critical applications as soon as possible. Some useful KPIs for patching. Look, how long does it take your team to implement security patches? How many devices on the network are up to date? Probably, sadly, 40%. And use the metrics for improvements. Keep it competitive, keep it live, and keep it snappy. Moving along to technology as well. I think you understand KPIs to understand your problems. Is your technology working? First and foremost. What would you say is the number of incidents detected? Have a look at SIEM, AV, malware, etc. And some key KPIs to keep. Mean time to detect. How long does it take your team to notice a threat? I think the average number of days between intrusion and detection is about 100, which is still way over in my personal opinion. Mean time to resolve. How long does it take to remediate? Is what that means. And the dwell time. The time elapsed between detect and resolve phases. The average dwell time globally is about 120 days. Share the metrics with your team. You're looking for improvement on all sides, really, and use it for training purposes. And also, if you look to technology, you want to make sure that you're using it to its fullest potential as well. But if you look back at those figures, it's a bit scary, really. Look, mean time to detect. The average number of days for intrusion and detect is about 100. that's kind of criminal. The guys can be in and out, and they know everything about your company within that time, and the dwell time as well. 120 days is kind of mind-blowing. Yeah, and that's kind of where we're sitting in a minute. I know, Rich, that you're quite eager to pick up the mic and follow up on this one.
I'm always eager to take something and do something with it. You know, would you guys mind if I just what jumps out at me when you look at these KPIs? You know, we talk to clients every day, and we say, are you collecting data on risk? And they say, well, you know, we live in this is luxury times right now. The ability for us to actually quantify risk by picking up hard data. So these key performance indicators, something as simple as, you know, how many of our staff click on a link? How many of our staff share credentials? How many of our staff allow tailgating? Look at any of these. How long does it take us to patch? How many unsupported applications do we have? This is very, very simple data sets that we can capture and use for that's what I want to talk about now. So first of all, how many of us, raise your hands out there if you are actually collecting KPIs every time you do a pen test or every time you do a vulnerability assessment? And that, I don't understand why CISOs aren't mandating that their service provider align a deliverable to KPIs that they have established to make sure that they are in fact monitoring continuous improvement. I want to talk about now. Okay, so got these KPIs. If we're start to do better testing, do a holistic testing, expand our testing to include people and process, then what we want to do is capture these KPIs, these simple KPIs Jeff reviewed, collect and record these for people, for process, and for technology. Why? So we can improve, for continuous improvement, right? We establish a benchmark. Here's where we are now. Right now in 2020, on average of 43% of our staff will click on a link. We want to bring that down. Okay, we want to bring that down that's outside of our appetite. So once you benchmark where you are, you take these KPIs, you knew that, I knew that, and you make sure they're repeatable. You can use them next year and the year after that and year after that. And while you might tweak them, you always want to make sure that you've got your finger on the pulse of the risk associated with staff clicking on a link, or your manager, how long it takes you to patch. You want to reduce that amount. It takes us 30 days now. We want to bring that down to 2 weeks. A week from now, a year from now, we want to bring that down to a week, and streamlining. And by reducing the time to patch, you reduce the associated risk. So each KPI you select has got to be smart, okay? It's got to be reusable. It's got to be a good data set. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is establish, here's the bar, and then raise it according to your risk appetite. I just threw this in here. This is a copy of the capability maturity model. You can use this for anything, but if you just align this to people, process, and technology, put in your KPIs and be able to track and say, here's where we are this year. And here's where we need to be next year, and start using a model, a very, very simple model, to mature your process, mature your penetration testing, make sure that you're getting more value year after year after year for your pen testing. Make sense? Very few of, I would say, if I had to guess, maybe 15 to 20% of our clients collect KPIs, and maybe 10% of our clients have their information security risk management programs modeled for maturity, for continuous improvement. So they're collecting the KPIs to use to reduce the risk year after year. Okay, I gotta not slip into preacher mode, but that was my point. So the takeaways here, we're just gonna wrap up. The takeaways are, we're testing our technology, but that's all we're testing, and that's only the tip of the iceberg, right? We've still got 2/3 of the problem. We have people and we have process. These are attack vectors. We should, by simply adjusting our scope, incrementally adjusting our scope, and starting to look at the attack vectors, the obvious attack vectors through our people and through our process, we get much more. The vulnerabilities associated with people and process connected to our systems, why aren't we addressing them in penetration testing? It's a question of scoping. These are real and significant, but we're neglecting them. We're neglecting to quantify. First of all, we're neglecting to recognize these are attack vectors. And we seem to be dealing with them. Our people, that's our security awareness program. But why aren't we connecting, outside of audit, why aren't we connecting our testing program to verify the KPIs in our security awareness program? why aren't we using in our testing program, making sure that an undetected, unauthorized access is detected and responded to, and our incident response plan, it kicks in and actually works. This holistic testing approach will multiply the return on your testing spend. I've said that, but we're wrapping up, so I'm going to say it again. Anyway, you got to make sure it's scalable, and you got to step back and look at the whole. You'll have a much better understanding of your attack surface and a much better, clearer view, a more streetwise view, an attacker's view of your system. Okay, my grandmother, not my grandfather, who said, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. My grandmother said, Rich, young man, she said, don't look at the hole in the donut, look at the whole donut. Okay, and I just want to leave you with that. Don't concentrate on looking for little vulnerabilities. Step back and look at the whole, all right? And holistic pen testing can do that. Start to consider testing 3 degrees of in your testing: people, process, technology. You'll get a much better return. Jeff, you want to add anything?
No, like I say, I think we covered a lot there. I think that KPIs are really important. I think you should incorporate it everywhere, really, especially on pen testing, because that's where you're really going to start to find out where the flaws are, and you need to undiscover your weakness to make yourself better and stronger, really.
Better and stronger. Now you tell me. We've got a couple questions here. I've got a question in. Jeff, you want to take this? The question is, how should testing be scoped to address the current work from home environment? Good question. Jeff, give us a couple ideas for what should we be testing in the home environment for people, process, and technology.
Yeah, look, people, processes. I think we touched on this a little bit beforehand. If you're looking at people, you're looking at phishing, you're looking at pre-texting. If you're looking at processes, you're probably looking at instant response, backups, and again, going back to patch up everything. Technology as well, you've got to be testing VPN connections, firewalls, and rats and what have you. I think for the bigger picture, if you're looking at maybe organisations that have got maybe a bigger security model, a bit more mature in their operations, I think they need to understand risks. I think if we are looking at pen testing, they really need to start looking at authentication, authorization. I think with remote working, that would be one of the first things that I would jump on, especially with MFA. That said, look, endpoint protection, endpoint visibility and response. I know endpoints are usually or inherently signature based, and look, it can take maybe half an hour to bypass them on some ones at the minute. Probably number 3, you want to look at network architecture and segmentation. And again, keep banging on about segmentation, but I think that's so important nowadays. Cloud services, you've got to make sure that just because you've got the cloud, you know the full remit of them. You've got to look at misconfigurations in clouds. I know we're seeing a number of breaches in cloud at the minute. And just fundamentally what we do over here is kind of educate and make sure that people are aware of some of the flaws in the system at the minute. We've got COVID, we've seen a lot of scams on COVID. You touched on the Twitter scam as well, Twitter hack. I think, yeah, you just got to have your wits about you, really.
It is easily done. Looking at your work, everybody's work from home environment differs, whether it's your kit or your staff are using their personal kit. But certainly if you got a pen test coming up, by including phishing staff at home, pre-texting staff at home, calling staff at home, trying to get their credentials, it's just a question of scope. But certainly incident response, do your staff report breaches or suspected breaches of their laptops at home? And are you testing for this? So we need, because the attack surface has expanded, we need to expand the tests, the surface on which we test for those attacks. But the same thing. We've got another question came in. It says, can holistic testing be done in sampling, or should you do the whole organization? Okay. Well, good question. It depends on the size of the organization, obviously, but in fact, what we would suggest, if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, say you're 500 staff, I would absolutely start with baby steps. Remember what we said, come into the shallow end of the pool. Start holistic testing. Take your pen test scope, your technology scope, and expand it incrementally to include the key staff. the key staff, maybe one person from management, one person from IT, one person, and it's selective, almost like sampling. But I would on your first go with holistic testing, start by sampling the key staff that you feel are in the primary attack vector. Right, the easiest attack vector to start to, because if you've never collected KPIs before, you don't want to be inundated with a lot of data. You want data that speaks to you and build on that database. You want to make sure that these KPIs are smart, like we said, they're timely, they're relevant, they're good data, and that you can the next year you can do this, and year after year you can increase the scope. But ultimately, I would never recommend doing in your first sample is to take a rough sample of maybe 20% of your company. And by that, I mean everything. A lot of people do fishing across the whole company. I recommend fishing by department unit, because you'll see a cultural vulnerability associated with, people who work in marketing are much more likely to click on the link than people who work in finance. And you can then start to understand your pockets, cultural vulnerabilities associated with departments, and figure out what departments are more likely to click on a phishing link. So this is what I would suggest. But in general, if you're just starting out with a holistic testing approach, I'd absolutely say start small, scale it up. We got one more question. How many KPIs should be identified for each area? Jeff, you want to take that? How many KPIs should have been identified for people, process, technology?
Yeah, sure. Good question. I think the answer, it depends on the maturity of the risk management program. I think if you're starting just to collect KPIs, concentrate on 3 each area, which you said earlier. And when you feel comfortable and the data sheet has become a bit more constant, then you can start to move it up again to 5. But if I was being honest with you, I probably wouldn't have more than maybe 8 or 10 now. I think it's funny enough that you asked me how many KPIs to actually pick up on pen testing. I was speaking to a client the other day who asked me about, look, what sort of KPIs should I be keeping for my APIs, which is a bit of a tongue twister. And it was quite a good one, really, because it's something that I hadn't done before, but I kind of looked into it, and I found if we are keeping KPIs on APIs, you should be looking at technical vulnerabilities, business logic, API discovery, support hosting security, Swagger manifestation ingestion, and vulnerability validation as well. And again, once you have the basics there, you can start to build it out.
Good point. Any other questions? Anybody want to know about my hair products? It's a straight VO5, no conditioner. We get those questions a lot. Okay, well, if you have any questions, absolutely mail them into us. Contact details are here. Anything coming into info@riskcrew.com or Jeff or myself, this is our email addresses. Before I let you go, can I ask you one quick favor? At the end of this, when you sign off, you're going to see a quick survey, and these are basically on the topics that we discussed. Do you collect KPIs, et cetera? And I'd really appreciate it. Jeff would really appreciate it, more importantly, if you took out just 2 minutes and answered the survey questions at the end of the webinar. If that's it, if there's no other questions, let me just say thanks. You can get the copy of this webinar from our website. There's a whole series of the webinars on the website, I meant to say. They're recorded, you can download them, but I appreciate you taking the time to spend the afternoon with me and my hair. And by the way, the camera, it's true, the camera does add 10 pounds. I'll let you go. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.